rich man's world.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Queen, for coming onto my podcast.
It's a great opportunity to get to know you a little better and just to share some of this interesting awesomeness with you and your listeners.
There's a lot of awesomeness here. You're a lot of awesomeness. And honestly, it's an honor to be doing this interview with you and you really are this incredible force within the world of sexology in terms of women's sexuality, empowerment, everything. It's you are one of the big people that have really created so much change for everyone in terms of masturbation and pleasure when it comes to female sexuality and everything. So thank you so much for everything that you do.
Those are super good words. I will try to live up to them. And, when I was college, a storyteller came to the campus and was telling stories and told some story that I have no idea what it was, except that it had a chorus. And the chorus was, follow what fascinates you. Follow what fascinates you. So I just did.
I love that.
That's my story right there.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that's kind of me doing this podcast too, is also follow what fascinates you, follow what excites you, and I do think also the money will follow. If you work hard on something and you do it, that you will find a way to make that a living, if you can, for the most part. It takes hard work, I think, but if you do, then you can still make it your career too. And what are your thoughts on that? Do you agree with that?
Well, yeah. And honestly, there's this old phrase that everyone's heard, probably, sex sells. And you can look at that a whole lot of different ways. Obviously, we're here in a vibrator store where I've been working for many, many years. Yeah. And we're here in the Antique Vibrator Museum. Yeah. So it just goes to show that sex, if this is sex exactly, was selling decades and decades and decades ago too.
There's some vibrators here.
The oldest profession implies that sex sells. But sexuality is a socially fraught issue in the United States, for sure, especially this year. So I think people need to understand that they really are going to have to follow what fascinates them, really bring the energy of that with them, be entrepreneurial sometimes, or figure out where the places are where they can focus on sexuality, do the most good. People ask me, I'm bored with my law school. I want to be a sexpert now. And I'm like, finish law school and focus on sexuality related issues in the law. You have no idea how much we need you. I'm a researcher, but I'm kind of bored looking in test tubes. I'm like, look at the test tubes, looking for some other stuff that we haven't found yet. People say, what's a sexologist? And the answer to that is basically somebody who is a person who academically or professionally specializes in sexuality, not I learned how to have anal sex, so I'm going to start a podcast, although that's rad. That's the thing, and it's relevant. It's good, but it's not a sexologist, though. And people kind of forget that these kinds of specializations come from everywhere in the world of professionalism in the academy. They're sex is everywhere.
Right. And it's really cool that you have a PhD in sexology and that you are a researcher in the space, and that at Good Vibrations, where we are right now, you run sexology here. You're the chief of that. You run the culture here. So you really are this pillar in sexology, this big icon in that research too, which I think is really cool. Well,
I hope I'm one of the people who helped sort of bring sexology into the world where people have even heard the term.
Totally.
When I was in college, I hadn't heard the term. Plenty of people hear it from me for the first time even today. Right. So I'm not the only one, certainly, but I'm one of the ones that spans the different spaces.
Yeah, and I think how you actually started working with Good Vibrations too is really interesting, because Betsy Dotson, do you want to just tell people who that is for a second, and then also how you met the co-founder of Good Vibrations and started working at the store?
There are two extremely important women to know about in this space, and actually three if you count the owner of the very first women focused sex store in the United States, and that would be the woman who started Eve's Garden, Del Williams. Cool. But so the three. Del started Eve's Garden after she had gone to a Betty Dodson workshop about vibrators and masturbation at the early 70s National Organization for Women Conference on Sexuality. First one they ever held.
That's so cool.
Super controversial, but also so embraced. People were so passionate about having a space to talk about issues that were repressed almost everywhere.
Right.
And I'm sure that there are going to be your listeners who are all, what, repressed everywhere? We talk about sex all we want. And others will go, you could talk about sex anywhere? Yep. Yeah. But you got to bring it. But yes. No. I mean, you have to make other people comfortable too.
Totally.
So Betty Dodson was the person who stepped up and she was like, I'm a fine artist. I'm going to draw pictures of vulvas and show these women who have never, ever, ever looked at their own pieces of, below the belt pleasure anatomy. And for some of them, it was not pleasure anatomy. If you don't understand it, if you don't learn it.
Right. If you don't know what a clitoris is.
The pleasure isn't necessarily automatic, right? As so many of us know. And so she inspired this whole generations now. She just died a couple of years ago. And she had been teaching live masturbation workshops. She was amazing. A force of nature, maybe bigger than she needed to be, but there she was. And and she inspired Della Williams, who started Eve's Garden in New York City in the early mid-1970s. And she inspired Joni Blank, who started Good Vibrations in 1977 in San Francisco. And Joni was a pleasure activist, a teacher, therapist.
I love that, a pleasure activist.
Yeah.
I am a pleasure activist.
Yes, you are.
I am adding
yes, we all are. And I think Annie Sprinkle actually coined that term, who was also inspired by Betty Dodson and this crew.
I grew up in a very religious community. Like, I did not have any sex education growing up. There was no queer people in my community. Being gay was wrong. I'm queer myself. And so growing up in that environment was really difficult when it comes to sex. And I remember actually, like, maybe when I was 17 years old, I left the community. I wasn't religious anymore. I was living in San Francisco. And I was like, okay, it's time for me to figure out how to have an orgasm. Because I never had one. And I came across a Betty Dodson video on one of those masturbation workshops. And it was one of her first thing was look at your own vagina, look at your vulva, and just and also the magic wand was really prominent. And so I always knew about her and thinking whoa, this video is super old. I wasn't looking for porn. I was looking for guides to masturbation. And I came across her content. And I think it's so crazy that even in 2017, when I watched that video, people are still seeing that and are still learning from it, from what she did. And the fact that you went there is just so cool. I think that's so cool. I think what I want to do for the rest of our conversation is kind of pick your brain as an expert and educate and give advice to all of these people, all of them, the faking it fam is what I call them. Because I've gotten honestly hundreds of messages from people saying I don't know how to please myself, or just all these different things. And I wrote a list of 6 questions that were the top questions that I got from everybody. And I was wondering if you can just answer them. And then
I would totally love to.
Yay.
I would totally love to. And let's make sure one of them mentions faking it, or else let me tell you my thoughts about that after we get all done with everything.
All right, cool. All right. We'll say that as a bonus question.
I have thoughts.
All right, cool. All right, cool. Well, the first question that came up a lot is shame. There's a lot of shame around sex, especially queer sex. I mean, I've personally experienced internalized homophobia, but in general, just shame around having it, doing it, wanting it, fantasies. What can you give advice on how to not have the shame and why it's there in the first place for people?
Well, the first thing is you understand that it's so common. It's not just your problem. It's super common. The people around you may never express that shame to you, but often they feel it or have felt it.
Got it.
If you see people around you that don't appear to be living in that shame, kind of tune into them to see if you're close enough to them. Ask them about whether or not they had a journey around that they wanted to share any information with you, because you're trying to be on that journey too. There is no shame in looking at what is around you, saying, I don't have all the resources I need to be able to step out of this space where I'm hanging out with people who are weird about sex, so they're taking it out on me or just in general. And realize that living in an atmosphere of shame is abusive to us.
Right.
If other people are, bullying us, shaming us, try to step away. That's abusive behavior. They may not know any better. They may be acting out of their own, feel for them, but step away if you can, because there are people in this world who don't want to shame us for our sexuality and will help us find paths so that we can feel good about it.
No, totally. I think
we all deserve that.
Yeah. Some of the points you're saying is that it's normal. It's normal to feel shame. We all feel it. We all are surrounded by people who make us feel that too. And then also just doing what you need to get out of that by listening to some podcasts like this, that helps normalize sex. Or for me, something that I needed to do when I felt shame about sex is cuddle with my partner for 10 minutes, or just, figure out what it is that you need to get out of the shame and try to surround yourself by people that are sex positive, that normalize sex. And another thing I think that you're also touching on is that it's okay to feel this and know that it's okay. You feel the shame, but you know that it's not wrong. Mm-hmm. It's okay to sit in that a little bit, and just be like, okay, I feel this way, but I'm going to practice compassion with myself. And I know that there's nothing wrong with feeling the shame. And hopefully with time, I won't feel it anymore, having sex. And,
it's like sadness or ennui, right?
Exactly.
Those are feelings that are not super duper fun to feel, but they have their place in our emotional constellation, and shame is that way too.
Yeah.
But it's also, shame also helps us, I think, get to this space of saying, I'm not a bad person. If people are aiming this kind of opprobrium at me, that's just inappropriate.
Right.
It's just, and we can be caught in the crossfire of other people's pain, and that's awful, but but as you say, it is normal. I'm not crazy about the word normal because it's used, as a shaming agent so many times. But the fact is, the norm is just wider than we ordinarily acknowledge.
Totally. Yeah. And another question that came up a lot too was about masturbation. And this actually, I got it a lot from my followers, and I've heard a lot about this from my friends too, because a lot of my female friends, they don't masturbate.
Yeah.
They don't masturbate. They don't have a vibrator. Yeah. They have sex. They have a lot of sex, but they don't pleasure themselves. And they never wanted to. They never had an interest to do it. They're never like, I don't feel the urge to do it. And so one, isn't important to masturbate? That's my question for you. And two, why don't we want to? Why don't women want, I personally do it all the time, but that's just me. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Good Vibrations was the founder of National Masturbation Month.
Amazing.
Back in 1995. It's been, it's been a quarter of a century. It's really amazing. And one of the things that we heard the most when we did this, because, we're just trying to raise the profile of masturbation in the culture. We just want people to have more access to information and to not to be shamed and all of that. And what are we doing? We're talking to shock jocks on the radio. I'm talking to shock jocks on the radio, and they're saying things like, masturbation is second best. Why would you masturbate if you've got somebody to have sex with? And I've got to say, I suspect that one of the things that some of the followers and friends who don't masturbate have internalized is this idea that masturbation, that people who don't have people to have sex with masturbate. Mm-hmm. And that can, that could be people who are super introverted and they don't want to go outside and meet anybody. Right. All right. That makes sense,
so
right?
Put somebody down.
Introvert. I get it. But also, why don't you just go find a partner? And with women, because the message with women is, it's so easy for girls to find a partner. People will have sex with you. Mm-hmm. That's, of course, not always true. Right. But even if it were, masturbation and partner sex are not the same thing. They're both expressions of the erotic impulse, erotic, desire to have erotic feelings or experience. But in the case of partner sex, it's also mashed up with, you're really not okay if you don't have a partner. Mm. This is something masturbation takes off the table, and it takes away that source of shame. It also asks you to focus inward on yourself and your sensations and your pleasure. And that's not what sex education teaches us to do, right? Sometimes we're thrown off because so many people have sex ed, even medically appropriate sex ed or medically correct, whatever the laws in those few states that mandate it
I love that. It's like saying masturbation is hands-on sex education.
Well, it really is.
I love that. That's so cool.
And the reason that we had to do National Masturbation Month in the first place was because then Surgeon General Dr. Joycelyn Elders, nation's first Black woman Surgeon General, said a really small, sensible thing about masturbation. When asked a question at a conference, it might have been a setup, I'm not sure. Sex education. What about masturbation? Should masturbation be part of sex education? And she said that's something that perhaps should be taught. And the phrase was basically embedded in the taught about in the context of sex ed.
Yeah.
The right wing basically tried to make people think that she was encouraging young people to masturbate in sex ed. That was never what anybody ever said.
Right.
Please don't even gaslight us like that. Anyway, they did. Anyway, and she got fired for saying such a tiny little thing like sex education. It implies it's education about sex. Why wouldn't we think about it in those terms? But here's the other thing. Hands-on, solo, inwardly focused, sensate focused on your senses, your body and how it feels. Yeah. Focused on learning the elements of arousal, what arousal feels like. Yeah. Like, I don't really feel like doing it might mean you are waiting for the sensation of turn on to overcome you and go, there's not a human being in the room with me. I got to do it. And some of us have our masturbation experiences and the way that they get instigated in these like bouts of horniness, right? There are plenty of people who are like, oh, it's Thursday night. It's time to masturbate. I'm going to do some deep breathing and some stretches. I'm going to meditate for a few minutes and then I'm going to get my magic wand out, and put it on their calendar as self-care or who
I do it to help me fall asleep sometimes.
Yes,
like, it
which
relaxes me after.
Great for. It's great for cramps and other kinds of, especially musculoskeletal pain. There's a lot that's good and well-being focused around masturbation, which is why one answer to your question, should we all be doing it, is yes. But that question embodies a should, and so not everybody wants to, not everybody feels comfortable. Not everybody should be doing it, but I would encourage everybody who doesn't want to do it to just interrogate themselves about why don't they?
Right. Yeah.
Because when you masturbate, you learn how it feels to go through the sexual response cycle without the hopefully very attractive nuisance. I shouldn't even use that phrase, attractive nuisance. That was terrible. The another person with you means that you're focusing on another person as well
especially
as yourself.
As like women too, we're trained to do that.
If you're a woman. But the important thing to understand is that having sex with a partner isn't necessarily the way you get clued into your own specific touch needs, speed and pressure needs. Right. Whether there's a toy, whether there's not a toy, whether there's two toys. If you've got two hands, you could use two at a time. Yeah. And all of the different ways that you start to realize that you're almost at orgasm and figure out how to sustain that sensation and have the orgasm rather than have it dwindle down. Right. Like a sex therapist will have heard every single story in the universe about, well, I almost get there, but then I can't, or I just can't even ever get very turned on, or it's over so fast, I don't have time to come.
Yeah, speaking, let's okay, actually, I just want to wrap up what you're saying, then I have another follow-up. So you're saying that, yes, people should masturbate because a couple reasons. One, because it's hands-on sex education. You're learning about your own body, how your body feels, what your body needs to feel pleasure. And you don't have to think about another person. It's just you. And also, you don't have to necessarily do it because you're turned on. You can do it because you're tired and you can't fall asleep. You can do it because, you have cramps or you want to do self-care. There's so many reasons to please yourself. And I would even add another reason to do it is because it's like kind of practicing the right to vote as women. We get to practice the right to please ourselves. Yeah. That's a reason we should masturbate. We're lucky to be in this country, in this place where it's actually legal for us to use a vibrator. Like, let's keep it that way and let's practice our right to pleasure ourselves. And that's like another reason to do it, in my personal opinion.
I think you're absolutely right.
Totally. And then the point that you're saying that people feel like they get super close. So this is something that I talk about with my friends all the time about how sensitive their clits are.
Yep.
Because all the time they're saying, yeah, like I have sex with my partner and then it just like feels like too much, or I can't touch it because it's like, it's too much. A lot of the too much is like the word that I hear a lot is that it's too sensitive. It's too much. It feels good, but then it feels like I have to pee and it doesn't feel good, or like all these just like conversations. I have some thoughts on this, but what are your thoughts on how to overcome that, and what women or like people with vulvas should be telling their partners when they're having sex and they feel this way, or with themselves, like what they should be doing with themselves?
Well, in the first place, if arousal is given time and opportunity to build, what is ordinarily the case is that more sensation can be taken in. So that, for example, like folks who are into BDSM know this, that if there's sort of some sexual response going on, sexual energy, not everybody who does kinky play is folds the sex into it, but some do, and many utilize it this way. You know, if you just walk up to somebody and say, "Can I have your consent to spank you on the butt?" You go, boom, we'll be like, "Oh, that kind of hurt." If someone's turned on, it will feel different, and it becomes part of the sexual sensation that's around. So I'm sort of starting at grad school here, but I think that this is important for people to know that it's one of the reasons that orgasm is good for pain issues, is because high arousal helps to mask pain, and we metabolize it differently, if you will. And that means that it's great to know when you're getting aroused, because one of the things that can happen when you're aroused is not aroused enough is the too much thing. That can mean not turned on enough. It feels good to be touched. Oh, there's the clitoris. It feels different than being touched somewhere else on the body, right? Great. But or people are starting with vaginal penetration, which it's harder to catch up to arousal. Not impossible if other things are good, but it's harder to. It's not where the sexual arousal generally starts and is focused. So that's the clitoris.
Oh, okay.
The clitoris. So people think, you know, all this talk about opposite sexes that we've all been, you know, taught by people just repeating the phrase all the time. I just said it. See, I'm part of the problem. We are not opposites. In fact, there are not two sexes or genders. There are more than that. And we are not opposites because everything about us comes from the same kind of tissue as we grow. The clitoris and the penis are comparable to one another, function the same way, essentially. Homologous in terms of their sensation, especially. The vagina is not the opposite of, or the companion organ to the penis, except when intercourse is desired to reproduce, because intercourse is fun to do, et cetera. But that's not the thing that everyone desires and gets off the most.
Isn't like the inner vaginal canal like analogous to the shaft of the penis? Or?
Sort of, yeah. There's much more sensitivity in the head of the penis, the head of the clitoris. If you ask a guy, like, what to say to a male partner, one of the things you could say to a male partner, see who likes this phrase, is, if you had to masturbate without touching your penis, could you come? Some guys could, but not all. And so the orgasm gap, when we hear or use that phrase, means basically the difference in how often somebody who is a cishet male or coded as male orgasms versus how often somebody who's cishet female or coded as female orgasms. And the biggest reason, one big reason, is because people do not necessarily get as aroused as they need to be to fully experience high arousal and orgasm. And without high arousal, orgasm is much less likely to happen. Much less likely to happen, because it's kind of a process, right? With orgasm as the culmination. But the other thing is that if someone doesn't get much clitoral stimulation, they start to get overloaded. The the sensation is too much too soon.
If they get too
hard,
much clitoral stimulation,
too fast,
or not enough. What do you mean?
Well, if they don't get enough clitoral stimulation, they won't necessarily climb the, climb the arousal hill. If arousal is a hill, I don't know. I just put it on top of a hill, I guess. There. But the other thing is, if the clitoris is touched too firmly, too fast, too much suction with oral. There are a variety of ways that the clitoris could just be like, oh, that was just more than I can stand.
Right.
And if somebody's not super turned on already, it's more likely for that to happen.
Got it. Okay, that makes more sense.
Because and even people who are like, I love my air vibrator.
Yeah.
If you are not remotely turned on, you go, oh, time to masturbate, and you just stick an air vibrator, which has a suction sensation on the clitoris, and turn it up to high. That'll feel like too much for many users. If you start a powerful wand vibrator and you don't ease in, that'll feel like too much. So it's even possible to be too much when you masturbate.
Right.
But the fact is that if you explore and if you pay attention to your own time frame for this, what you need, what you like, what works, what doesn't work so well, then you're ready in the context of partner play to say, you know what, if you will go a little slower, it'll be easier for me to get turned on.
Totally.
Or if you will touch my clit just with the full palm of your hand rather than touching it like it's a doorbell. It's not a doorbell. Then that might be easier to experience. And you've touched yourself already. You've got some more information to share with somebody who's about to touch you. And that's
really
important and powerful. And if it's an ongoing partner, that is super intimacy building.
Totally.
And I think people believe the opposite often, that if they are with an ongoing partner, that partner should just read them. Like if it's the right partner, they'll just know.
Right.
That's magical thinking. I mean, it's an awesome fantasy. It's super sweet and romantic, but it's not like, did you think they had better sex education than you did? We were in the same class. Didn't talk about pleasure at all.
Right.
So getting on the road with a partner where you talk about pleasure comfortably, I can hardly think of better things to share with someone.
Right. Yeah. No, I think so some of the points that you're making, I think this one analogy you said about like playing with balls is kind of similar to orgasming from just purely penetrational sex, and that is the orgasm gap. How many men can just get off by having their balls played with? How many women can just get off by just penetrative sex? It's the same thing. And that's why there's not that many women who can do that. And that's okay. That's normal because our clit isn't being stimulated, and that's the problem. And the fact that you need to be turned on to have that heavier stimulation too is a big part of it as well.
And if intercourse is the definition of sex.
Right.
Which many people really kind of think that it is.
Right.
Then all of that, all of these things that I've been sort of talking about as misnomers, those are not misnomers because intercourse is what we're supposed to be going for.
Right.
And making it possible for people to think about sex as lots of different wonderful things to do, solo, with partners, with or without toys. That gives us more options. It's really empowering to think that way.
Totally. And some of my followers, when they talk about vibrators, they say that, oh yeah, like I started using a vibrator and it's the only thing that works for me. I can only get off with a vibrator. Is that bad? Does that mean that there's something wrong with me because I can't get off without it? Like, does that mean that I can't? I don't know. So some people are concerned about that.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that? If you can only get off with a vibrator, does that mean that you can only get off with a vibrator or
No, but.
Okay.
This is a yes and no, but kind of a question. It's a great question. It's a super common question.
Yeah.
So when people come and talk to me and say, I can only get off with a vibrator and I'm concerned that that's going to mess me up for partner sex, I ask them, were you getting off during partner sex before you got the vibrator? Did it change your experience with partner sex? Rarely is that the case.
Right.
It's usually, no, I wasn't having orgasms then either, and I'm having orgasms now, but only with my vibrator.
Yeah.
So having an orgasm is a learned experience. It's reflexive, but you also learn what works for you.
Right.
And the thing about vibrators is, one, there's neurology in the clitoris, head of the penis tube, that responds to vibrations particularly well for most people. Not everyone likes it. Not everyone responds to it. But these nerve endings in the clitoris that are like, hey, a vibrator, hi, I'm here for you. That is something that, most of our human partners don't vibrate exactly. Some of them can go pretty fast, but not that fast. And vibration is extremely fast motion, right? That's what it is. Right. Little motion, but fast. And so the way that I would like people to sort of think through this question is to know that when your body learns how to have an orgasm, the orgasm happens in the brain, happens in the pleasure center. So the spinal cord and the nerves that feed it, send the message, and the brain goes, oh, boom, the vibrator or no vibrator, the orgasm can happen.
Right.
And the idea that we have learned in our body, learned in our pleasure center to have an orgasm means that we can have them in different ways, but we might have to add in different kinds of stimulation, even mental stimulation like fantasy, in order to get us over the edge of the difference that we're exploring. But people who are saying this sort of as new vibrator users, remember they're in a point in time. Our sexuality is a process. It's a journey that we're on for our life for as long as we are.
Yeah.
And it isn't correct to say that it could never happen. It won't happen. Oh, there's something wrong because I can only come this way.
Yeah.
It's, let's see if adding extra clitoral stimulation during intercourse gets you closer in the same way that a vibrator would, because that's awesome. If I could write a law, I shouldn't write a law. That's like I should. But if I could really tell everyone it's legal to put your hand on your clitoris during partner sex, during penetrative sex, it's awesome. And that's what a blended orgasm essentially is. Two parts of the body that maybe you could get to orgasm solo with it, but when together, they emphasize the arousal and get you to orgasm easily. So explore that.
Yeah, and I think that's really great advice, that it's okay to use a vibrator. There's no shame in that. And trying all these different things. Like there are these parts of the part that you're saying, these nerve endings that respond to the vibration a little bit. And so I never knew that. I think that's really interesting. So I think a lot of us can learn from that.
It's like, how did these show up in our bodies?
Right.
Which is a beautiful miracle. Everybody who says, whether or not they're religious, this is a beautiful miracle. It's like, yes, it is. Yeah. That's a lovely, lovely miracle.
Yeah.
And of course, there are gazillions of kinds of vibrators that people might try.
Right. Totally.
And some of them are mild and might not be enough to get somebody to orgasm, but can sort of help warm you up. Some of them are the kind that you can sort of fit on your clitoris while you're having partner sex, or that ride on the penis like a vibrating cock ring.
Yeah.
So many ways to say, is this a kind of stimulation I like? Yeah. How could I incorporate it? There's just so many ways.
Yeah. Okay. And so the last question before we get into the faking it, because I know we want to talk about that for a second, is communication in bed, especially when saying no to something. So I think when in hookup culture, new partners, it's very difficult to say, I want this or I don't want this. What advice can you give to especially like people with vulvas on how to go about doing that?
Well, I want to start by saying this is actually related to the shame question, and also the sort of the sex positive impression that many people have about what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be responding, right? Mm-hmm. This is related to that because it's very common to get into a hookup or even a more ongoing thing. Honestly, sometimes a hookup turns into that, and the same kind of sex that happened the first time continues to happen.
Right.
Where you can think that everybody else is doing all this other stuff and you should be doing it too, right? Mm-hmm. I just read a fascinating piece of research about choking in sex. And, this sort of takes us further afield. So I'll just say very, very briefly, people are learning about choking from watching it in porn.
Right.
And now this is me as a sexologist saying, porn is not intended to be sex education, everyone. It's intended to be exciting and a turn on and whoa, people do that. and all the things. It's a spectacle. It's a kind of media.
Right.
And it is not intended to model the way you're supposed to have sex.
Totally.
So watch out for that choking. You can harm each other like that.
What if they're being pushy? Because I've had friends who said that, like, guys are like, come on. Like, what do you do?
So I really want people to understand that a hookup is a casual situation unless it turns into something different. And you can leave.
Right.
You can leave. You can say to yourself, this isn't the right situation for me to be in.
Totally.
It doesn't feel safe.
Yes.
It doesn't feel like I'm getting listened to.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like I'm going to get what I came here for, frankly.
Totally.
So
love that.
Maybe you already are a masturbator, then you have a thing that you can do when you get back to your room. But if not, you can go do something else.
Yeah.
You could go back on the hookup app and try it again tonight. There's lots of ways to step into a space of how am I going to try to make my sex life fit me better?
Right. I love that. Just like you stepped into the situation, you have every right and all the autonomy to step out.
Yeah.
And I love that. That's a great point. And I think a lot of people don't remember that when they do this. And that comes back to how we just feel like we need to please.
By this time they have blue balls. We can't leave.
Yeah.
Like, also,
somebody said that to one of my friends at Stanford.
I bet they did.
Isn't that crazy?
That's pretty unacceptable, but not 100% surprising.
Right.
Also, I just want to remind everybody, I just encourage people to go back to their apartment and grab their vibrator or, get the shower massager out or whatever they do. Not everyone has two hands, but the people who do have two hands, if they have even one hand and a penis, they can reach it. They can reach it.
Yeah.
And if their balls are that blue, they can fix it.
Totally.
It's awesome.
Exactly. That's a really good point. And so you want to touch a little bit on the faking it. And then my usual question that I ask actually is, how have you faked it? That's like what has transformed you a little bit in life. And then we can kind of just talk about faking orgasms, because I actually named this podcast after Fake It Till You Make It, not faking orgasms. So my mission is to help women not fake orgasms. I want them to have real orgasms.
I really, really want that for everyone too. And part of the, this is also part of the porn is not sex ed thing. It's part of I asked a porn star in the back of a cab once. We were in a conference. We were going somewhere, something about faking orgasms. And she said, I just want everybody to just really feel this too. She was like, oh, I would never have an orgasm at work. That is so personal.
Wow.
This is like, that's her job.
That's crazy.
And she is not good. She's not good. She's going to be in control of her orgasm phase. She is, she's doing
that's insane
work. And that's, save that for home for the boo. And just remember that you can have sex without orgasm. You don't have to have an orgasm for the sex to be worth having had. Right. There are other things you get from the experience.
Right.
But most importantly, when you fake orgasm, you teach a partner who didn't please you to the point of orgasm that what they did was the right thing to do to please you to the point of orgasm.
Right.
Meaning they take that set of skills and they try it on you again next weekend.
Yeah.
If you liked them enough to do it again.
Right.
Or they do it with the next hookup. Or, a partner who doesn't ask what you like, try some moves that include clitoral stimulation.
Yeah.
Look up to see if you're gritting your teeth a little bit because it's too much. That partner, bless their heart, they need a little more info. And we can help give them that info even just by staying silent and having our experience and not orgasming.
Yeah.
And then they'll say, did you come? And you say, no, not really. But if you want to continue to play, we can do some things that might get me there, or maybe not. I don't know. I used to say I don't usually come the first time with a partner, which was true.
I love that. It's a good,
and then I
easy thing
started to talk to partners, and then I started to come the first time with partners because I learned enough and got confident enough to say what I needed and wanted. And,
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Queen, for taking the time to chat with me. I think this was so informative for everybody, and hopefully lets people know that what they do with their bodies is okay, you know?
And it's theirs.
And it's theirs, exactly.